view of your life so far? What would you say?
Oh my God. That's one lucky bitch.
She was once known as the most dangerous woman in Hollywood, not because of what she did, but because of what she refused to become. At 93, Angie Dickinson has nothing left to lose, and nothing left to hide. For decades, she smiled through betrayal, played by the rules of powerful men, and endured a system built to silence women like her. But now, the silence is over. The names are coming out. 5 men. 5 legends who built their reputations on charm, fame, and lies, and left her to pay the price. This isn't gossip. It's justice, long delayed. The truth she's about to tell isn't wrapped in glamour or nostalgia. It's sharp. It's cold. And it cuts through the golden facade of old Hollywood like glass. Before the lights, before the fame, Angie was just a small-town girl from North Dakota, a dreamer with a notebook full of poems and a fire no one could tame. She had no connections, no fancy training, no mentor to open the door. Just that haunting stare, that quiet confidence, that unspoken defiance that made people stop and look twice. In the Hollywood of the 1950s, that kind of woman was a threat. They wanted her soft, silent, and smiling, not powerful, not aware. But Angie Dickinson refused to play the part. And that's what made her dangerous. When Angie Dickinson met Frank Sinatra, the world called them Hollywood's golden couple. But even golden things can burn you. Frank didn't love her the way the magazines claimed. He owned her. At first, he wooed her like a perfect gentleman. Flowers delivered every day, private dinners so intimate that even the waiters barely breathed, moments so cinematic they felt unreal. And for a while, Angie believed it. She believed she could have both, love and freedom. But then, the curtain fell. Frank didn't hit her. He didn't yell. Instead, he took pieces of her every time she moved closer to independence. When she accepted a role that included a kiss, the script disappeared. When she signed a deal he didn't approve of, she came home to shattered photographs and silence so heavy it froze the air. Angie wasn't his lover anymore. She was his possession. Hollywood whispered that she was the luckiest woman alive. But no one saw the fear behind her eyes each time she walked onto a set. Every smile had to be calculated. Every co-star had to be approved. And when she dared to resist, even quietly, the punishment was swift and precise. One call from Frank, and producers backed out. One night of defiance, and 3 roles vanished. The breaking point didn't come with fireworks, it came quietly, with a phone call at 2 in the morning. That night, Angie had just landed the lead role in a film already buzzing with critical praise. But Frank didn't care about her success. To him, only one thing mattered: control. He called the director that night, calm, collected, and terrifyingly certain. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a threat no one dared to challenge. Keep her in that film, and your career ends here. By sunrise, Angie's role was gone. No explanation. No apology. Just silence, the kind that tells you everything you need to know. That was the moment she finally understood. Frank Sinatra never loved her. What he loved was control. 4 years, she stayed not for love, not even out of fear, but because some small part of her still believed the man she met in the beginning might come back. But he never did. He became a ghost with power, haunting her even after they ended. Hollywood moved on without her. Casting calls vanished. Doors that once opened effortlessly now shut quietly behind her. She was still Angie Dickinson, but she was no longer untouchable. Still, she said nothing. Not a word. Because that's what women of her generation were taught to do: move on, stay silent, and carry the wound like a secret. But secrets don't heal. They rot. And at 93, she's finally done hiding the scar. Frank Sinatra, the man who made the world swoon, made her disappear, one quiet command at a time. He didn't need fists or rage. He had a phone, a voice, and a power that people feared more than truth itself. But the next man in her life didn't destroy her career. He broke something far deeper: her role as a mother. He wasn't just a husband who left. He was a father who turned his back on a child who never had a choice. Angie Dickinson had already lost her career once. What came next nearly cost her soul. For most of her life, she carried herself with grace so flawless that few ever saw the cracks. On screen, she was captivating, commanding attention with a single glance. Off-screen, her calm was mistaken for peace. But it wasn't peace. It was survival. She had learned to hide pain behind poise, to bury heartbreak beneath beauty, because in her world, vulnerability was dangerous. Behind the interviews, behind the glossy magazine covers, there wasn't a movie star, there was a woman quietly holding together what little remained of her world. Not her fame, not her pride, but her family, or what was left of it. When Angie met Burt Bacharach, it felt like destiny had finally given her a second chance. To the world, they were a perfect harmony, the genius composer whose music moved the world, and the actress whose presence needed no soundtrack. The media adored them. Headlines called it a match made in heaven. Their wedding shimmered with elegance, laughter, and the illusion of forever. But behind the doors of their Beverly Hills home, beneath the glow of their golden image, was a silence too deep to ignore, the kind of silence only a woman alone inside love can truly feel. At first, Angie explained it away. Burt was an artist, she told herself, unpredictable, consumed by his muse. Long nights in the studio. Sudden flights for inspiration. Endless sessions that bled into dawn. It was all part of the creative life, wasn't it? But even before their daughter was born, Angie felt something shift. The distance between them was no longer just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. She wasn't a partner anymore. She was an accessory to his genius, a quiet fixture in the background of his brilliance. When their daughter Nikki arrived, Angie thought everything would change. And for her, it did. The first time she held her baby, something inside her heart was reborn. But for Burt, the joy came mixed with discomfort. Nikki was different. Diagnosed early with a developmental disorder that few doctors could explain and even fewer dared to discuss. Angie faced the storm head-on. She learned the language of specialists, memorized therapy routines, and spent her nights at hospital bedsides. Burt, meanwhile, seemed lost in his own world, of deadlines, tours, and melodies that drowned out the cries at home. The breaking point came quietly, in the sterile light of a hospital hallway. Nikki had been admitted after a severe episode. Angie, exhausted and desperate, called Burt from the corridor, her voice trembling as she tried to hold it together. He answered, paused, and asked one question: "Will this delay my flight to Europe?" Then he hung up. In that moment, something inside her shattered. She understood, finally and fully, that Burt would never be the father their daughter needed. From then on, Angie carried the weight alone. She organized every appointment, tracked every medication, fought through sleepless nights and quiet heartbreak. She turned down roles, refused interviews, and walked away from the world that once adored her. Not out of regret, but out of love. Because Nikki wasn't just her child. She was her reason for everything. Her world. Her truth. Her forever. While Angie's world began to revolve around sacrifice and survival, Burt's world never seemed to skip a beat. He didn't fight. He didn't confront. He simply drifted away, into music, into fame, into a rhythm of avoidance that became his refuge. While Angie spent sleepless nights beside hospital beds, Burt stood beneath spotlights, collecting applause from strangers. The trophies piled up. The audiences cheered. And behind it all, a woman who had given everything was quietly breaking. Angie tried to reach him, to make him see the weight of what she was carrying. The exhaustion, the fear, the endless appointments, the loneliness that comes from parenting a child who needs more than the world is willing to give. But every time she called for help, his answers came in the same empty tone, polite, detached, and meaningless. The moment that shattered her wasn't public. It wasn't scandalous. It was quiet and cruel. Nikki needed a specialized treatment, one that required Burt's signature for approval. Angie called him 3 times. She wrote 2 letters. And when he finally picked up the phone, she barely got the words out before he cut her off. His voice was steady, cold. "Don't call me again unless she's dead." Then the line went dead. It wasn't just the end of a call. It was the end of hope. From that moment, Angie stopped expecting anything from him. She focused on what mattered, protecting Nikki. She became mother, nurse, and anchor all at once. She kept her daughter safe from the emptiness her father left behind, shielding her from a truth too painful to understand. And through it all, Angie never spoke out. She didn't run to the tabloids or write a tell-all. She didn't expose Bert, even though she had every right to. Because that's what she had been conditioned to do: suffer silently, stand strong, and never ask for recognition. When their marriage ended in 1981, the world called it amicable. The headlines praised their graceful separation. But they didn't know the truth. The nights Angie paced the floor with a crying child while Bert was sailing through Europe with another woman. They didn't know about the mornings she woke up alone, clinging to the hollow promise that things would somehow get better. But the deepest cut came later, when Angie discovered that Bert's betrayal hadn't begun after Nikki's birth. It had started long before. While she was pregnant, while she was dreaming of the family they'd build, he was already living a double life. The other woman had even been inside their home, laughing with him in the kitchen while Angie slept just down the hall. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated betrayal, one that stripped away the last illusion Angie ever had about love. It was the kind of betrayal that doesn't fade with time, a moral wound so deep that even Angie Dickinson, a woman of grace and restraint, could never find the words to forgive it. For years, she tried to protect her daughter, Nikki, from the truth, shielding her from the pain of absence, from the silence of a father who had long since disappeared. But children always know. They can sense when love is missing, when the air in the room feels hollow. Nikki grew up with a mother who gave her everything, and a father who was little more than a ghost. When Nikki passed away in her 40s, a life marked by longing and misunderstanding, Bert Bacharach, the man who once called Angie his muse, didn't attend the funeral. No flowers. No call. Nothing. Angie stood before a church filled with strangers, delivering a eulogy through trembling hands, while the man who helped create that life simply vanished again. For decades, Angie stayed silent. She never lashed out, never corrected the myths. But at 93, she no longer owes anyone her silence. Not the press. Not the men who walked away. Not the world that applauded her pain. Bert Bacharach may have written songs that touched millions, but to Angie, he'll always be the man who turned his back on a daughter who wanted nothing but love. This was never the fairy tale Hollywood sold us, the golden couple smiling on magazine covers. Behind closed doors, it was a woman carrying the full weight of a broken family while the world kept calling her lucky. And somehow, she endured. But her next heartbreak wasn't born of love, it was born of power. Because the next man in Angie's story wasn't a husband or a lover. He was a kingmaker. The kind of man who decided who would shine and who would disappear. In Hollywood, saying no to the wrong man could cost you everything. Not your heart, your career. For Angie, that man was Jack Webb. To the public, he was a legend, a visionary who redefined television, a master of gritty realism, the genius behind Dragnet. But behind the curtain, he was something else entirely, a gatekeeper. A man whose quiet disapproval could end a career before it even began. Angie believed talent would protect her, that fame would make her untouchable. She was wrong. One word. One rejection. One man in power, and she was gone. Now, at last, she's ready to say his name. To expose the shadow that followed her for decades. Because Angie Dickinson isn't looking for sympathy. She's offering something far rarer, the truth. And in Hollywood, the truth is the most dangerous thing of all. To Angie Dickinson, he wasn't just another man in power. He was a warning carved into the very walls of Hollywood. A reminder that no woman, no matter how talented or respected, was ever truly safe. Their paths first crossed in the early glow of her television career, when ambition still felt like a promise instead of a risk. Jack Webb was casting a new crime drama, and Angie was being considered for a key recurring role. The meeting took place in his office, a shrine to his success. Shelves heavy with awards, framed photos of stars who owed their fame to his nod of approval. Jack spoke the way powerful men often do, short, sharp, measured. He praised her recent work, mentioned the way she lit up the screen, how she carried something different in her eyes. It felt like a moment of recognition, the kind every actress dreams of. Angie walked out of that room with her heart racing, certain she had just taken the next step toward everything she'd worked for. But that night, the phone rang. The voice on the other end wasn't Jack's, it was one of his producers. Calm, detached, almost rehearsed. "The role's no longer available," he said. "No reason. No regret. Just finality." Angie sat there in silence, confusion twisting in her chest. Hours earlier, her agent had been thrilled. Everything was lining up. So what happened? The answer came later, whispered over dinner by a friend who worked behind the scenes. He leaned close, eyes heavy with pity, and told her the truth. Jack had made an advance. It wasn't overt, not the kind of scandal that made headlines. It was quieter, more deliberate. The kind of test that powerful men used to measure how far they could go. Angie had smiled politely and turned him down, believing professionalism would protect her. She was wrong. By the next morning, 3 of her upcoming projects were gone. Meetings vanished. Calls stopped. Doors that had been open for months suddenly locked shut. And no one said a word. The silence wasn't accidental, it was orchestrated. Jack Webb didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't explain. He simply erased her, efficiently, completely. That was the moment Angie understood the real cost of integrity in Hollywood. It wasn't just missed opportunities or fading fame. It was exile. A quiet kind of punishment delivered by a man who never needed to raise his voice to destroy a career. It happened quietly, no scandal, no headline, no warning. One day Angie Dickinson was everywhere, and the next, it was as if her name had been erased. Not by the audience, but by the invisible machinery that ruled Hollywood. Casting calls stopped coming. Scripts that once carried her name were suddenly under revision. When offers did appear, they were hollow, the mother of a lead half her age, a background cameo, a single forgettable line. The woman who had once lit up television screens was now being pushed into the shadows. And as Angie's light dimmed, Jack Webb's only grew brighter. His shows swept awards. His reputation as a visionary deepened. Hollywood adored him, the critics, the networks, the producers. No one asked why Angie had vanished. They wrote her disappearance off as choice, a graceful exit, a woman retreating from fame to focus on life. The truth, of course, was far darker. In those days, exposing a man like Jack Webb wasn't just career suicide, it was an act of futility. The system didn't punish powerful men for silent cruelty. It rewarded them with more control. Angie didn't stay silent because she was weak. She stayed silent because she knew no one would hear her. So she smiled for the cameras. She waved on red carpets. She let the world believe she was taking time off, even as she watched everything she had built crumble piece by piece. The hardest part wasn't losing the roles. It was realizing how fragile everything truly was. Every line she'd memorized, every scene she'd owned, every risk she'd taken could be undone in a single night, by a man with a grudge and a phone book. Fame, she learned, was never permanent. Success was rented. And respect. That was the first thing to vanish when a man decided you'd said no to the wrong request. Years passed. Jack Webb's star eventually faded, but not his legacy. When he died in 1982, Hollywood mourned him like a saint. Tributes, documentaries, glowing retrospectives. They called him a pioneer, a truth-teller. No one mentioned the trail of silence he left behind. Angie didn't speak out. Not then. Not out of fear, but because she understood how Hollywood worked. Her story would be dismissed, twisted, minimized. So she held it close, not as revenge, but as evidence. Because she knew she wasn't the only one. There were others. Other actresses. Other careers that vanished in the same quiet way. The same names erased, the same promises broken. Angie carried their stories with her, waiting for the day when silence would no longer be the rule. Now, at 93, she no longer whispers. Her voice doesn't tremble. She doesn't call it bitterness, she calls it truth. Jack Webb didn't just take a role from her. He took her momentum, her place in the story of Hollywood. But what he didn't take, what he couldn't take, was her memory. And now, finally, she's ready to make sure the world remembers it too. Over the years, Angie had heard the whispers, the kind that never made headlines but passed from one woman to another in the dim corners of Hollywood parties. Stories of actresses who had dared to say no to the wrong man and vanished. Some left quietly, their names erased from casting lists overnight. Others reinvented themselves in smaller towns, pretending they had never dreamed of stardom at all. But Angie refused to disappear. Not because she owed the industry anything, but because she refused to let it bury her. She came back, reshaped, stronger, taking roles that were smaller in budget but larger in meaning. And slowly, the audience remembered. They remembered the sharpness in her eyes, the depth in her delivery, the woman who could steal a scene with a single line. But beneath that quiet resurgence, the wound never truly closed. It wasn't the loss of fame that hurt most, it was the theft of what should have been hers from the start. Because what happened with Jack Webb wasn't an isolated act of cruelty. It was a symptom of something bigger, an entire system built to protect men like him, to keep women silent and complicit. When Angie finally spoke his name, it wasn't to tarnish his legacy. It was to reclaim her own. To remind the world that silence is not the same as forgiveness. But just when it seemed she had survived the worst of Hollywood's machinery, life dealt her another kind of cruelty. One that didn't destroy her career, but her peace. The next man in her story didn't hide behind casting lists or contracts. He hid behind love. He said all the right words. He told her she was the center of his world. But behind every compliment was control, behind every promise, possession. What began as devotion soon became surveillance, a kind of affection that watched her too closely, that loved her too loudly, until it felt more like confinement than care. He didn't break her heart, he built a cage around it. His name was Larry King. To the world, he was the charming voice behind the microphone, the man who could make anyone talk. But to Angie, he became something else entirely, a mirror that reflected obsession dressed as love. What he called devotion, she would one day recognize for what it truly was, a prison disguised as passion. When Larry King entered Angie Dickinson's life, she was at her most fragile. The years of fame had begun to fade into memory, and the silence that followed her divorce felt heavier than applause ever had. She was still luminous, the kind of beauty that time couldn't dim, but she was lonely in a way that only those who have been adored by millions can truly understand. And that's when Larry appeared. He wasn't a movie star or a powerful producer. He was quieter, softer, a man who seemed to see her, not the actress, not the legend, but the woman. He didn't chase her with diamonds or promises. He listened. And after decades of men who only loved her image, that simple act felt like salvation. Listening felt like love. But what began as tenderness soon turned into control, so gently at first that it almost felt protective. He asked her to call when she arrived somewhere, then to avoid certain colleagues, then to let him read every script before she accepted a role. He told her the world was dangerous, that he only wanted to keep her safe. And Angie, so tired of being mistreated by men in power, wanted to believe him. But slowly, her world began to shrink. Friends stopped calling. Invitations stopped coming. She wasn't forbidden, just persuaded. Every no from him came wrapped in a reason that sounded like care. If she smiled too long at another man, he would grow cold. If she laughed too freely, he would retreat into silence. Every apology she gave was met with the same haunting line, "You're all I have. Don't leave me." Larry never raised his hand. He didn't need to. His weapon was guilt, soft, relentless, and invisible. The breaking point came quietly. One day, Angie found a small microphone hidden beneath the seat of her car. When she confronted him, Larry didn't deny it. He smiled and said it helped him understand her better, to know what she felt when she was alone. He called it intimacy. She called it something she couldn't yet name: fear. She tried to walk away, but every time she did, he found his way back, with tears, with letters, with the kind of desperate declarations that sound like devotion but reek of possession. And then came the day everything changed. After missing one of his calls during a meeting, her first glimmer of a comeback, she returned home to chaos. Every photo of them had been ripped apart, her journals shredded. He stood in the center of the wreckage and whispered, "If I can't have you the way I need, I don't want you at all." That night, Angie didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just lay awake, tracing the moment she'd lost herself, realizing it hadn't been one moment at all, but 1,000 small concessions disguised as care. The next morning, she packed a single bag, took Nikki by the hand, and walked away. No dramatic goodbye. No phone calls. Just silence. She hid in a small apartment for weeks, blinds drawn, the phone off, the city outside unaware that one of Hollywood's brightest stars was relearning how to breathe in the dark. She thought she needed space from him, but what she truly needed was freedom from the woman she'd become under his shadow. The woman who smiled through silence, who mistook control for love. Years passed, and the world wondered why she never told the full story. Why she stayed quiet. Angie would only say, "You don't always realize you've been broken until long after the pieces stop fitting. And when that moment finally comes, you're too exhausted to explain." Now, at 93, she speaks without fear. Not to settle old scores, but to set herself free. She doesn't protect those who dimmed her light. She only wishes she had seen the truth sooner. Because sometimes, survival feels like loyalty, until you realize it was surrender. But her deepest wound didn't come from a husband or a lover. It came from a friend. A man who smiled for the cameras beside her, then destroyed her dignity with one whispered sentence. That man was Johnny Carson. He invited her to The Tonight Show to honor her with a Lifetime Achievement Award. The lights glowed. The audience rose. For a moment, it felt like the world still remembered her. But as he leaned in for a hug, he whispered in her ear, "I just saved you from being humiliated. Don't make me regret it." Hours earlier, he had been handed an unaired clip, a small remark Angie made about a disgraced producer from decades ago. It never aired, but someone leaked it. Johnny buried it. Not out of kindness but control. Then, live on air, he twisted the knife with a smile. "Angie Dickinson," he said, "is a woman who knows when to speak, and when to stay silent." The crowd cheered. The cameras caught her smile. But inside, she felt her career die quietly. No scandal. No headlines. Just silence. In Hollywood, you don't need a smear campaign, you only need one powerful whisper. And Johnny's whisper was enough. After that night, the calls stopped. The nominations vanished. Her name faded into the margins of a history she helped build. But she never forgot. Angie carried the truth, not as vengeance, but as memory. And now, she's finally letting us see what really happened. She didn't want pity, she wanted peace. At 93, she chose truth over silence. She named names, not to destroy, but to finally heal. Her story isn't just her own, it's a mirror of every woman who suffered in silence while the world applauded their composure. If her story moved you, share it. Let it be heard by those still afraid to speak. Because somewhere beneath Hollywood's glittering surface, there are still stories buried alive waiting for someone brave enough to remember them.